Hello, everyone. And we want to welcome you all to Prolific TV. And today's guest is Mark Lang. And with me, this is such a special time. And I'm honored to have Mark on the show because Mark is an education consultant, but to me, he's an education guru. And that's because Mark is so light years ahead of everybody when it comes to education, especially in the Lehigh Valley. And Mark has been trying to transition the Allentown School District into a better system, let's say it that way. Mark, how are you doing?
Very good, Maurice.
It is such an honor to have you here on the TV program. Let's start out by saying this. Let's educate the listeners and our viewers on exactly what the education system was and how it got started, and why do you believe it needs to make a transition into the 21st century?
Okay. Most people probably don't really know this, but the system we have today was started basically in 1890 or around thereabouts. And the goal was to develop people for the factories of the day. That was it. That was the heyday of the big factories. So the steel factories, the big oil, that kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the goal then was to create a typical average worker who could then be trained to do jobs in those different factories.
Right.
And that was basically a rather low level of skill who would be trained a repetitive job.
So it didn't take any thinking, in other words.
In fact, they didn't want thinking in those days. You know, they would fire you if, in the early days, like at Bethlehem Steel, if you tried to think on the job.
That is true. They didn't have unions back there, and the boss would tell you exactly what to do, and that was that. You couldn't question it.
Because it was efficiency. Efficiency was everybody doing what they were told to do.
Right, right.
But now we have a very different world. Efficiency doesn't count because somebody's coming up with something new and better. So even the most efficient is no longer successful.
So we're in now, and I was gonna say we're going into this technology world, but we're already in this technology world, and that way of thinking no longer works. Why is that?
It's because as I said, if somebody makes a better one, then it puts the one that's efficient out of business.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we've advanced to the point now to where only the people who keep making better ones are the only ones who can be successful.
So what type of education do you believe we need now?
So now we need to train people for that world where only making things better all the time is really the key criteria. And that means people who can think on their feet, basically work in teams,
Mm-hmm.
because nothing is done by yourself anymore. It's too complicated. And basically solve problems. What I like to say is be entrepreneurial thinkers,
Right.
because that's kind of what entrepreneurs are known for, is finding creative answers to problems.
So as an entrepreneurial thinker, you're telling me that they now will take ownership of whatever project they're a part of, and because they're taking ownership of that product or that that problem-solving solution, one, they'll take more pride in it because it's theirs, and they build confidence in themselves as well. We have some schools that are doing that. Could you name some of these schools and tell me exactly what goes on in these schools?
Well, these are there's a group of schools called the Deeper Learning Network is the ones that I would really refer to.
Mm-hmm.
One that's very often talked about is called High Tech High. It's a charter school in San Diego, and they do what's called 100% project-based learning, which means instead of having kids go through a lesson, like a history lesson, this war happened this date or whatever, they give the kids an open-ended question,
Mm-hmm.
like how did the Oakland suburbs get run down? Or how did the Allentown neighborhoods get run down, or something like that?
Right.
Now, that's a much more complicated issue. There's no right or wrong answer. It's also something that might be of interest to the kids in the school. And then you let the kids figure it out, basically. So the teachers are not feeding the material. The teachers are setting up an environment where the kids are learning on their own. And they make a mistake. They don't know what to do, so you give them a little nudge, and then they make a mistake, and that's okay. You teach them that's okay. Everybody makes mistakes.
Right.
But in doing, they basically learn by doing. That's the only way you can learn, because you're developing patterns of thinking that make you a good problem solver, basically by solving problems.
So you become efficient in problem solving versus being repetitive, in other
Exactly.
words, which I think is great because it also builds up the kids' confidence, and it tells them that they're allowed to do other things, and it allows them to venture out into other areas, not afraid to make mistakes, which is important. What do you think about
Well,
that?
the other thing is that problem solving is difficult. most people will not do it unless they want to do it. You have to do it for intrinsic motivation, because I want to do it for me, not because I have to do it to make it an A or a B or something like that.
Right.
And so when you make so in the education, we have to make the project real too, so the kids are engaged and they will put the energy into really learning these things.
One of the things that fascinated me is one of the schools you went to, and where the kids had free reign.
Yes.
And I can remember where some of the Allentown school, let's call them, were Mayo and went to this school, and they saw how the kids were just going into the teacher's desk and how everybody was
That's right.
trusted. And this was in a bad neighborhood, but in this school, the kids were professionals. They were trusted,
right.
and they were
Exactly.
doing their job so far as going to school. Can you talk about that? Because I think that is powerful.
When you're in an environment where the kids take ownership of their learning, and basically they want to do it, that they will focus on, kids want to learn if it's in an environment where they see value in learning. In these schools, because they're given ownership, it's amazing. They don't act up, they don't get in trouble. They basically focus on because they want to do it. They're doing it for themselves.
Yes.
And so it feels amazingly different. As soon as you go there, you can tell it right away, because you're right, it's like a professional environment. And the kids are given enormous freedom, and yet they never cause any problems.
That is so powerful. Again, we have Mark Lang, the education guru here. And again, listen to what Mark says, because he has a reservoir of information when it comes to education. And I am a firm believer that our education system needs to change, because America's continuously declining when it comes to education. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Continue to tune in to the Future of Education with Mark Lang on Prolific TV, and we say thank you.